Hi, I'm Ricky from Fancy Games, and welcome back to our series where we're turning this amazing concept by Beck Hallstead into a game-ready model. Last time we finished the low poly and high poly versions, so now it's time for texturing. So I backed all the mesh maps and then put them all in their corresponding slot. And I'm going to be using these mesh maps to do most of the heavy lifting during the texturing. I start off with the hook or the blade itself. I usually start with the base material where I set the metallic, roughness, color, etc. Then I use a second fill layer with a lighter color and then use a mask editor and the curvature to create some highlights on the edges. And then use a slope blur filter just to make it look a bit more organic and not as perfect. And I do the same but with a darker color set to multiply, and I invert the mask so that I'm not getting the edges but the cavities. Then I use another filler to create a gradient to make the bottom a little bit darker than the top. I then create a smart material out of all of the layers to use on the other parts of the mesh. For the colors, I just start off by picking them directly from the reference and then adjusting them. I find it pretty useful to go into the mask view to see what exactly the mask is doing, because sometimes it can be difficult to see if you're working in the material view. For the orb, I start off with a blue base layer where I set the metallic and roughness and everything. And then I just paint in some different blues and turquoise until I feel that it matches the reference nicely. On the hook itself, I also add a layer that only affects the height channel, so I can paint in an inset where the orb is. For the dirt and the grunge on the hook, I simply use the same smart material I created at the beginning with some different colors, and then I add a black mask to the whole thing, and then paint in with white where the grunge and dirt should be. I have symmetry turned on for this in the beginning just to lay down like the base grunge. I switch back and forth between painting black and white to create some more interesting shapes. Then I paint in the same grunge at the base of all the corals, just to tie them in with the hook a bit more. I then paint some more grunge on the hook where the corals are, to make the transition between the hook and the coral even less noticeable. And then hop into Substance Designer to combine all the different parts of the textures into one texture. I could have just done this in Photoshop, but I will be able to use this setup for future projects as well. The setup is pretty simple. I use a blend node to add all the different parts of the textures on top of each other, and to tell the blend nodes which part to use where, I'm simply using the ID maps that I backed in Substance Painter. And then realized that I had some issues with the textures overlapping, so I baked out the ID maps again with less dilation so they don't overlap. So I imported the new ID maps into Substance Designer and exported all the textures again. And then I used the color ramp to change the roughness a little bit so it's not as shiny. And that's it. We're done turning the concept into a final game-ready model. I hope you enjoyed the process, and all the project files will be available on our Patreon page, which we will link in the description. Thanks for watching and see you next time.